Good evening. Allow me to be the first to welcome you to tonight's event, part of our Religion and Incarceration series for the Butler Seminar on Religion and Global Affairs. My name is Daniel Myers. I'm the director of the Center for Faith and Vocation. Tonight we have titled the evening, "The Most Merciful, Muslim Work with Ex-Offenders." Given the overall topic of the seminar this year, religion and incarceration, we may be invited to engage with some difficult subjects, including poverty, violence, racism. So as we go through the evening, please do what you need to do to take care of yourself as we take seriously the topics at hand. And we thank you for being here to engage with these important questions. I wish to also thank those who helped make tonight possible. We want to thank the NEH Frederick M. Ayers Fund, the Muslim Studies Endowment, and the Desmond Tutu Peace Lab here at Butler, all of whom were co-sponsors for tonight and the seminar overall. And I also want to thank the Philosophy, Religion, and Classics Department for always working with us to provide a faculty director for our seminar series, which this year is Dr. Chad Bauman. I'd like to introduce Dr. Bauman as he will be sharing a little bit more about our keynote speakers. He focuses on Asian religion and also teaches within gender, women, and sexuality studies, peace and conflict studies, and international studies. His primary position is professor of religion here at Butler. Dr. Bauman is a fellow in the Desmond Tutu Peace Lab and Religious Freedom Institute, and he's also been part of a team effort among Butler colleagues to establish the new Butler Muslim Studies Endowment here on campus, which, as I mentioned, is part of what made tonight possible. So to introduce our two keynote speakers, please join me in welcoming Dr. Bauman.
Good evening and welcome. And the students who are in the class that mirrors the seminar series and I have been getting to know our speakers for this evening, and I think you're in for a treat. This evening we have the unusual honor of having not one but two keynote speakers. Both of them work at the Inter-Muslim Action Network based in Chicago, which goes by the acronym of IMAN. So you should pay attention. If that word's not familiar to you, IMAN, you're going to hear it again this evening. To reduce the number of my commutes to the podium, I'm going to introduce both of our keynote speakers now in the order in which they'll speak. They're both going to speak for 20 minutes, after which each of our respondents will have 10 minutes to respond. Harriet Lewis, PhD, is the Senior Director at IMAN. There she provides oversight to community and economic development initiatives and foundation engagement. Previously, she'd been the executive director of organizations that serve women, small business owners, survivors of domestic violence, and youth. She's been recognized by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts House of Representatives for her work on behalf of survivors and their families, and is the honorary consul general for the Republic of Cabo Verde for the state of Illinois. If you've looked closely at this evening's program, you may now be expecting me to introduce Shamar Hemphill. Unfortunately, to a family emergency, Mr. Hemphill was not able to join us. Thankfully, however, many talented people work at IMAN, and one of them, Nasir Blackwell, agreed to serve in Mr. Hemphill's place, and we're grateful that he was willing to do that on such short notice. So I'm going to introduce him now as well. Nasir Blackwell served 24 and a half years in prison, during which time he studied jurisprudence and did legal, educational, and advocacy work within the Illinois Department of Corrections system. While in prison, he co-founded the Danville Prison Veterans Organization, DanVets, and served as its commander for 2 years prior to his release in 2015. Since then, Nasir has worked with IMAN as a resident coordinator and is now a full-time organizer. As an organizer, Nasir continues to advocate on behalf of returning citizens. He helped write and push for the successful passage of SB 2282, removing a barrier that prohibited returning citizens from associating with other parolees while attending religious services, a relative, or in the context of community work. Nasir continues to speak around the city of Chicago on matters concerning criminal justice, parole reform, and restorative justice. Please join me then in welcoming both of our keynote speakers.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Peace and blessings. In the name of God, the most gracious and most merciful, I want to thank Reverend Daniel Myers, Dr. Chad Bowman, and Marguerite, and everyone at Butler University who were involved in organizing this series. Can everyone hear me fine? Okay. You can? Okay, great. I'm honored to spend time with you this evening to share what we do at the Inner City Muslim Action Network, commonly referred to as Iman, through the topic of tonight's event, the most merciful Muslim work with ex-offenders. Since I believe that we all are ex-offenders, current offenders, future offenders, against our families, our friends, the Most High, ourselves, I'm going to talk about our work and use the terminology formerly incarcerated returning citizens. And that's the terminology that we use at Iman as well. I will speak broadly about our community in Chicago and what Iman does as a Muslim-led organization, and my colleague Nasir will provide depth on Muslim work within the prisons and the formerly incarcerated returning citizens. Founded in 1997 and located in Chicago and Atlanta, Iman is a community organization that fosters health, wellness, and healing in the inner city by organizing for social change, cultivating the arts, and operating a community health center. As an organization, we operate with 7 core values. The first is that we are spiritually rooted and broadly informed. This means that we believe that the prophetic principles of compassion, service, and justice informed by local and global organizing models can be transformative forces for creating social change. During my presentation tonight, which is entitled Reflecting God's Light, I will share about our work by employing the Muslim context of the 99 names of God or attributes of God. Muslims trying to reflect God's light may focus on many of these attributes, and I will focus on 3. 3 names: Ar-Rahim, the most merciful; Al-Adl, the just; and Al-Mu'id, the restorer. Before talking about the attributes, I want to first talk about Joseph. Since childhood, I've loved the story of Joseph, or Yusuf, Joseph in the Bible, Yusuf in the Quran, and continue to have an understanding every time, new understanding every time I engage it. I think most people in this room are familiar with the story of Joseph and Yusuf. Making an assumption there, but I'm assuming that many people are. A tragic family story of jealousy, being wronged, and eventually restoration and forgiveness. Joseph, we've read, was a handsome and gifted young man, favored by his father, hated by his brothers who dumped him in a well. He was later sold, seduced, and incarcerated. Then upon freedom, he was restored, and he forgave. Reading from the Quran, Surah Yusuf, verse 9, it reads, "Slay Yusuf, or cast him forth into some land, so that your father's regard may be exclusively for you, and after that you may be a righteous people." I want to stress that his brothers left him in a well. They threw him away, and he was found and sold. A handsome and gifted young man, he was misunderstood. He was exploited and taken advantage of by some in power and imprisoned. But then through mercy and justice, he was restored. This story of pain and abuse, loss, mistreatment is the experience of many brothers and sisters that we serve at Iman. First, I will begin with Ar-Rahim, God the Merciful. When I think of mercy, I think of love as demonstrated by loving people through the sharing of resources. Iman is a federally qualified health center that provides a myriad of services in an integrated way to address the whole person physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. In our service area in Chicago, 50% of our service area residents are living at or below 200% of the federal poverty level, around 524,000 people in total. Each year, around 20,000 of the people released from prison in the state of Illinois return to 3 zip codes in Chicago, one being the neighborhood in which Iman is located. I say that because Iman does not have to go do outreach for this population. We just need to respond to a community need, and that's what we try to do. As people living every day, trying to figure out this existence we call life, oftentimes we don't see or fail to show mercy to people who struggle with systemic poverty and structural racism. Not we in this room, none of y'all. Y'all not struggling with this. People out there outside of Butler University are struggling with this. I was talking to a relative of mine about a recent report about health and quality of life disparities from someone growing up and living their life on Chicago's resource-rich North Side. If you're familiar with Chicago, it's like a tale of two cities. There's the North Side and the South Side. The North Side is more resource-rich, and then people growing up on Chicago's less resource-rich South Side. This particular study demonstrated a life expectancy gap more than 20 years between someone living on the North Side and someone living on the South Side. Someone living on the South Side, the average life expectancy when they lived to old age, more quote unquote, was 60-something. And it was close to 90-something for someone living on the North Side. The level of stress that many people who we serve experience because of their zip code have definite negative physical and emotional health outcomes that we try to address. For example, many young people impacted by street violence feel that taking public transportation is a risk due to neighborhood violence and turf wars. More specific, court-involved young men in our programs have shared with their case managers that they worry that if they are seen on a bus, they will be stopped, questioned, and perhaps threatened by individuals who see that block as part of their territory. Certain blocks are perceived to be under such control and so dangerous to certain young people that even transitioning through a neighborhood on a bus can be a significant risk. This danger not only affects healthcare access, but also access to healthy foods at affordable prices, as avoidance of dangerous routes causes many residents to shop for food at corner stores and gas stations, which is a familiar scene in many cities. This brings us to Iman's work in organizing. We have organizing campaigns and programming that addresses food access and criminal justice reform, and more importantly, work that is led by the most effective, which is our second core value. We believe that work towards social change should be led by those directly affected, specifically those who live with the consequences of economic and social disparities in our inner cities. Focusing on the second attribute, al-adl, God who is just. Not unlike Muslims, most people of faith are called to seek justice. Many Christians are familiar with, do not pervert justice, do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. And that's from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 15. And from the Quran, Muslims are familiar with Surah Al-Nisa, verse 135, where it reads, O ye who believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses of Allah, even against yourselves or your parents or your kin, and whether it be against the rich or the poor, for Allah can best protect both. Follow not the lust of your hearts, yes, lest swerve, and if you distort justice or decline to do justice, verily Allah is well acquainted with all that ye do. I don't think God is asking us only to seek justice for the believers. I don't think God is asking us to seek justice only for this population of people who believe as we do as we do, or look like us, or have the same values as we do. I believe God asks us to do justice for all of humanity. For people of faith, to know God is to know justice. Our prophet tells us that our collective prophet Isaiah tells us that when justice is driven back, righteousness stands at a distance, truth stumbles in the street, and therefore honesty cannot enter. And it is this lack of honesty that prevents some of us from connecting to people who are different than ourselves, including returning citizens. So why do we do what we do at Iman? Why are we a federally qualified health center? Why do we have housing for the formerly incarcerated returning citizens and court-involved youth who are at risk of shooting someone or being shot? Why have we led efforts to pass legislation to reduce the randomness and unjust ways in which brothers in our program were finding themselves reincarcerated, and legislation to incentivize employers to hire returning citizens? Because black men with criminal records are 60% less likely to get a call back after a job interview. We acknowledge that this reentry second chance is a misnomer, because most of the guys in our programs didn't get a first chance. The systemic poverty and structural racism experienced by many of the people we serve has not created the environment for a first chance. Instead of coming from a community with great schools, investment that would attract jobs, and affordable quality housing, most people are suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Second chance? No, we're just trying to get the first chance. We try to do this through holistic programming, through a program called Green Reentry at Iman, where we provide transitional housing for many participants, primary and behavioral health services, artistic expression, and mindfulness through our ceramic studio, and workforce and life skills training in our construction training program. I think many people in the room, or some of you may have seen the documentary, The Honest Struggle. It follows a period in the life of someone by the name of Sadiq. Sadiq is a man who, after living incarceration, became a resident in one of our Green Reentry leadership homes. There is a specific scene in the film that I find particularly profound, that I truly believe reflects what we try to do for humanity in reflecting God's light, in trying to be just. It is a reenactment of a moment when some young men jacked him for his car at gunpoint. Coincidentally, he drove a stick shift, and the young guys could only operate an automatic. So they left his car, and he got it back. And that was funny, I laughed at it. But I think the bigger point that Sadiq was trying to express is the next scene is he's asked to identify the young guys who stole his car in a lineup. And he said that he did not recognize any of them, any of the men who tried to rob him. And although he may have in fact recognized them, Sadiq went on to say, we want for our brother what we want for ourselves. He delivered mercy by giving those guys another chance. And yes, we want for our brother and our sister what we want for ourselves. And we try to be fair, and we try to be just. Now, what I'm going to say may bother somebody in here. It's a little graphic, so I want to apologize in advance if you want to step out. I'm going to explain a story. In the early hours of December 2nd, 2017, one of our participants was executed. It was the night of our annual dinner on December 1st, and many of the guys in our program were at the event. Stephen had plans with his family. That night, he spent time with his pregnant fiancée and her nephew at an indoor playground. Unbeknownst to Stephen, someone from his past saw him there. On the way home from the playground, Stephen stopped at a red light. The person from his past was following him and got out of the car, came up on the driver's side of the car, and executed him. Everyone else in the car survived, including his baby girl, 7, who was born a few months later. I bring up Stephen Moore because he is why we do what we do. He and his brother raised themselves on the streets. Stephen had been in our program for 6 months. We have an unprompted video of him talking about the impact of our programming in his life, that he did not know a different way of being before Iman. This was testified not only by him, but also his fiancée, who saw the transformation in him. They were making future plans of moving out of state and building a new life together. At Iman, Stephen was getting his first chance. After he was killed, the local newspaper noted his life as a gang member was killed on North Avenue. We knew Stephen. We knew his humanity. We knew he was becoming. So in his honor, in an effort to change the pervasive narrative of our participants as just being gangbangers and ex-cons, We named the second youth home that he was working on in Green Reentry the Stephen Ward Youth Residential Center to reflect the transformation that he and other young men who would become residents experience. We launched the Green Reentry program for men in 2010. And this year, we launched and just completed our first pilot cohort of Green Reentry women. That's a yay. I'm proud of that, personally proud of that, so that is a moment to clap. While we don't have any housing yet and provided limited training this year, it was a first step in an expansion that is our intention to maintain. Finally, Amouid, God the Restorer. As people of faith who believe in a creator that restores hope, who restores dignity, who restores what was lost or stolen, we try to be vessels for this mercy. Final example for the evening. Hassan is someone who served many years in prison and was invited to become the first resident in Iman's leadership home. He was one of the first cohort in our Green Reentry Workforce Training Program. He got his general contractor's license and went into business for himself. He met and married the love of his life in our multi-purpose space. He returned to Iman as a Green Reentry carpentry instructor, and he and his wife moved into one of our subsidized apartments so that they could save money for down payment on their first home, a home that was rehabbed by the guys in our program. And I am proud to say that Hassan and Mary have moved into their home a few weeks ago. God is a restorer. Not unlike the restoration and blessings experienced by Joseph and the Bible and in the Quran, after incarceration, there is restoration for the court involved and the formerly incarcerated men and women we serve. In the story of Joseph, he was able to use his gifts and eventually became the person who God created him to be. And that is our role as people of faith, to help people to become. We do this through love. I believe that God requires us to love all of humanity, and that God mandates that we act upon this love as seekers of justice, doers of mercy, living humbly while doing God's will. May we remain steadfast in our remembrance of God's love and our desire to do God's will and reflect God's light. And I will close with Surah Baqarah 177, which reads, "It is not the righteousness that you turn your faces towards the east or west, but it is righteousness to believe in God and the last day and the angels and the book and the messengers, to spend of your substance out of love for him, for your kin, for orphans, for the needy, for the wayfarer, for the beggars, and for the freeing of captives, to be steadfast in prayers and practice regular charity, to fulfill the contracts which you made, and to be firm and patient in pain or suffering and adversity and throughout all periods of conflict. Such are the people of truth, the God conscious." Thank you. And now I introduce my colleague, Nasir.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings to you all. My name is Michael Nasir Blackwell. Everybody just calls me Nasir. I'm a community organizer with the Inner City Muslim Action Network. A lot of the work I do is around criminal justice reform. I work with the brothers and sisters coming home from prison, and I do a lot of work within other coalitions, and I sit at a lot of tables. I'm sitting there thinking about what Dr. Lewis was just speaking upon, because Allah is the just, the merciful, the restorer, because I bear witness to that. I was formerly incarcerated for defending myself in a community that was raised and racked with violence, right? And even though I was a young man at that time, and I served in the military, in the Army Reserves for 6 years, training people how to use weapons, I was very young with the state of arrogance that no one can tell me where I can and cannot walk in my community. And then when my brother was murdered at the age of 18 years old by a group of gang members, I took matters in my own hands. I armed myself and I began walking my community saying I would not be a victim until the day came where I was confronted and I wasn't a victim. I became a defendant. This is where I learned Islam. Going through the incarceration system, I learned firsthand about the levels of our injustices within our society. I'm talking about, do we have any tissue? I gotta blow my nose, I'm sorry. I'm still fighting this cold, so please forgive me. I wanna share with you briefly, before I go off into some of the work that I do with the returning citizens at Iman, about the level of institutional and structural racism. I didn't understand or understood what that meant, because as a child going through the education system, I remember distinctly that when my family was living on one side of town, the junior high school that I was attending had everything. They had track, gym, home ec, arts, music class. Thank you. And then when my family moved to a different side of town, I went to a predominantly black school, and they had none of those things in their school. Matter of fact, all they had was study hall, right? I'm serious. And as a young man or boy, that struck me as profound, because when I went into that school, everybody's looking at me like I was a geek, because I was understanding the, not the education, but the curriculum being taught. They was almost 8 months behind from the curriculum we was being taught on another side of town. That was my first profound effect of seeing the institution, right? Wow. Forgive me. I didn't experience that again until I went through our justice system at the age of 25 years old. Coming back to Illinois to visit, and I was in Illinois not even 48 hours when I was arrested for the crime that I committed. Right? I was gone for 4 years thinking that I healed after we buried my brother. As soon as I come home, I was confronted with the same organization that murdered him. So yeah, it struck me as profound. And I told the truth. I thought I was a responsible gun owner. I bought the weapon legally. I told the police exactly what happened. They concocted a story that made me look like a hitman or a vigilante because the prosecutor could not place me in a gang. So they sensationalized my story to a set of jurors, right, that judged me based on what the prosecutor told them. They didn't know anything about my life, how active I was in the community, how involved I was with my family, with my newborn daughter. And I was sentenced to death because the prosecutor established that I was irredeemable. I was a threat to society because of my military training. He used the fact that I joined the armed forces against me to sensationalize me before 12 jurors. And that's when I learned the injustices with our justice system. It's not about the truth. It's about theatrics. Who can tell the best lie? And I began studying law right then and there. And when I was sent to prison in 1992, with an execution date 3 months after that, and it was stayed because we appealed, right? I began studying law, and I studied until the time I came home in 2015. And I became an advocate, a staunch advocate, changing the conditions in incarceration for the men that's being subjugated under that form of incarceration. This is what Iman does, right? When these men and women come home from prison, they're coming from walks of life that they was already being subjugated, coming from the less disadvantaged areas within their communities. I've only lived in Chicago for 4 years, and I saw this with my own eyes, right, of police grabbing groups of young people and just throwing them on a car just to pat them down and then told them they can leave. And if anyone resisted, was assaulted, and placed in handcuffs. So how can a young man or young woman grow in the same world that we all live in through that form of subjugation? And not even talking about the violence that they have to live walking from one block to the other, again, because of the misguided way our youth are growing up in these communities with no resources. No one's invested into their development or their family needs or concerns. And then the police is the very enemy that's supposed to protect and serve. This is why a lot of men and women end up with faith when they go to prison. Because you coming from a background where you already, not only are you disadvantaged, but you developed a form of hate for people who judge you, criticize you, point fingers at you. And then you are thrown in a state of incarceration because of the mistake you made, whether you were trying to eat, take care of your family, or you just didn't even care because of your misguided way of the way you was brought up in the world that didn't care about you. That's how I embraced Iman. When I came home from prison, the brothers remembered me inside as an advocate and brought me to Iman to meet our executive director, Rahman Nashashibi. And the rest is history. Allah placed me in a position where I can continue to advocate on behalf of those who no one advocate for. To this day in the prison system, it's very difficult for a Muslim to practice their faith, especially after 9/11. Volunteers rarely come in anymore because of the level of scrutiny correctional officials place upon them just to do their work. So how does one teach their or learn from their own faith that they believe in? I was blessed because I love to read. Even though our prison system is facing over a 60% illiteracy rate, you have a lot of functioning illiterates within our prison systems throughout the nation. How do you teach someone the values and morals of a book they can't even read, or having struggles and difficulties trying to interpret it, when you have no one allowed to come in to share that knowledge with you? And now today, our society is trying to say that our prison systems is under radicalization. When prior to 9/11, those same legislators was passing laws to assist Muslim men and women to practice their faith within the institutions. I love the way Spirit brought it out in hip hop, and I couldn't remember the rest of the name of the lecture he gave. But he spoke on hip hop and Islam and the converts, about people struggling, coming from nothing in society, the way society subjugates them. And then they're thrown into a cage for 10, 15, 20, in some instances 45 years, right? And they're coming home with that hope and desire that humanity exists on the outside because they don't remember it when they were young, growing up, going into that environment. And that's what sustained many of us in the prison systems, understanding our faith, our humanity. Islam teaches a level of humanity that makes so much sense. The story of Yusuf is talking about love and hate, right? Jealousy, envy. We live with this in our world today. The brothers and sisters coming home, they're not distracted with a lot of those things because they're trying to find a place to stay. They're trying to find a form of steady income. They're trying to find a way to rebuild their lives. But yet, they are confronted with that when they come home from the rest of society who considers you not only as a threat to their job and their livelihood, but to a threat to their very safety because you are, quote unquote, an ex-felon. Iman's healthcare and our behavioral health system help rebuild not only the physical nature of the men and women coming home from prison, but the spiritual and, more importantly, their mind. I even admit, doing all of that time in prison system, I had a mentality coming home. And it is a form of post-traumatic stress disorder because I have a psyche of distrust for everyone. Every one of you in this room. I'm serious because I was subjugated to believe that all of you in this room distrusted me. Right? Because of where I come from. And now, because I embrace Islam, I'm viewed as a potential terrorist. Because we need enemies. And our world continues to perpetuate, right, that philosophy. We have enemies, or should I say, we need enemies to justify hundreds of billions of dollars going into our armed forces who go into other countries and reap the benefits of the raw natural resources in those countries. And that's a whole nother conversation. The brother and sister returning home from prison struggles. I came home, I had to get identification. I had to reinvent myself. No one knew who I was. I had no identification. So therefore I had no ability to get a job or access to health care. And I was diagnosed with diabetes. And when I came home, it was because the healthcare system and the love they have, and they didn't turn their doors to no one. They turned no one away. And I met Dr. Althoff Kaiserdean, and he gave me a 2-week prescription for insulin, even though I had no money, no identification, and no health care. I was just out fresh 2 weeks. But I knew I needed these things. That showed me love, right? That people actually do care. People actually do care. It is in our nature. It is inherent in each and every last one of us. As we grow into adults, we are taught many different ways to believe otherwise, or how you should define love in your world or your personal sphere, right? In mine, it wasn't very much love. Because I looked at a world that had disdain towards me. So I developed a distrust to the same world. And it was only me coming home, experiencing and organizing and working with many others similarly situated like myself, I realized that not only does that love still exist out there, but I have an abundance of love to continue to share with these brothers and sisters that are struggling, trying to find a place to stay, trying to find a way to earn a living, and to reacquaint themselves with their distant families, let alone the friends they left behind. When Brother Yusuf was thrown in the well, his brothers left him behind. But he didn't give his humanity up, even though he experienced such hate, such disdain. I bet each and every last one of you in this room experienced that one time or another in your life. And just to see you sitting here lets me know that not one of you gave up. You persevered. I don't know how long it took you through that journey, through your travels, right, of refinding yourself, overcoming that sense of injustice that was placed upon you. But just to see all of you in here lets me know that you have overcame that. And that's through your background, through how you was raised and the life that you experienced. The conversation we have now will carry with you for the rest of your life. Maybe you only might remember one word, you might remember a sentence, or even a phrase or a statement. And I pray that this will help you grow into greater human beings through shared stories. And that's why I love organizing, because organizing in a nutshell is all about shared stories, one-to-one. And I love to make friends. I don't love to talk much, but I love to make friends because I get to learn about someone I never even knew. More importantly, I get to learn that this person's situation may be similar to mine, and their struggle is similar to mine, right? And we continue to work like this, building, or what we say, one link, one chain in green rentry, one block at a time. One block at a time. Just like it took years to destroy that community, it's going to take those same amount of years to rebuild it much quickly. Why? Because now we have the knowledge. We understood what we've done to level it down, and with that knowledge, we know what it takes to bring it back up. I love experiencing these types of shared stories. The redeemable value of men and women in society is greater than what we can imagine. Yet, we have scholars who will tell you otherwise. You will be judged, placed in a class, even isolated. What was that with the bell curve when the author tried to write the book to show the levels of development of one mind over another mind? How is that even possible? Are we talking about lack of resources here? Lack of opportunities here? How can one person, because of their skin color, be deemed a greater asset to society than another individual? But we have scholars out there in the world trying to teach that form of knowledge. It is our responsibilities, right, to rebuild the world. The burden is on the ones with the knowledge. The burden is on the learned. It is your responsibility to reach out and educate people and teach them otherwise. If we cannot have a conversation, then how are we going to learn? And if we don't learn, how are we going to grow? And if we don't grow, we end up being stagnant. And then we'll perish, and we won't serve a purpose here on this earth. But that's not the case today, because you have billions of individuals waking up every morning motivated with this passion in their heart because there's someone out there they know needs this assistance. Because you got your scholars, you got your doctors, your meteorologists, right? They bring something to society. The brothers and sisters coming home from me, man, this is the opportunity that we're giving them to bring something back to society. They have that opportunity. They have that option. And hopefully, from the work that I'm doing, the work that we're all are doing, they will reclaim that love and lose that distrust that I came home with. Excuse me. And realize that the world they live in is also all-inclusive. They have redeemable values. How can we have a sentence of natural life? You say this person is irredeemable. When I bear witness that if you give a person an opportunity to stop and reflect and meditate and think, they will grow and understand their own mistakes. Why? Because they're a human being. It is innate. It is in our nature. Now, yes, there are individuals, and I've met them, that are career criminals, and they refuse to do right, and they're going to tell you, I'm not going to do this. I was posed a question at an organizing event, and the question was, is there such thing as a form of good oppression? That's a profound question. Is there such thing as a form of good oppression? You know, me, I'm very animated. I'm like, first thing came out of my mouth, like, yes. Because everybody in the audience was like, no. There is a form of good oppression. It's called imprisonment. Believe it or not. Because there are people in the world who is not going to do right or respect human life. And you have to detain them somewhere or they will be a threat. So yes, we do need prison systems for individuals who holds no regards for humanity. But it shouldn't be used as a means to subjugate people. If you look at the history of our incarceration system, it didn't start off like that. It was about penitence, forgiveness, so that you can reclaim society again. And in some instances, ostracization, right? Or when they had the stocks and they threw fruit and apple and vegetables at you. That level of humiliation. That are redeemable values because you realize of the level of wrongs within your own heart that you hurt someone. So yes, we have redeemable values. We learned that from centuries ago. But how do we stray from that? Is it capitalism? Is it just making money? How do we stray from the ideal of redemption within society? I just said prison is a good thing. But if we have redeemable values, why are we incarcerating people? Because we live in a complex society. We live in a society that the world as it is not safe. You got Aryan nations, white nationalists. They are the ones that brings the greatest violence in our prison system today. But you let our federal government tell you, right? The problem is radicalization of Islam in our prison system. I don't understand that when a group of individuals who is well documented of committing murders across the nation in our prison system and the level of their hate, and they have doctrine, how can they not be a threat? But again, this is a society that we live in. How are we becoming aware of this? By attending these forums right here. And it is a great honor for me to be here and speak to you all. And I want to close with that redeemable value, that redemption. Because when I was inside, I used to knock on the concrete wall all the time and remind myself, I got to get out of here. Because back then I did not have a release date. But I knew that there is a such thing as a just God. And I never gave that faith up. I never gave that up. And then when I began reading the Quran and I embraced Islam, I realized that my mother raised me as a human being. I had humanity in my heart all the time. How did I end up here taking the lives of these men who attacked me if I have a sense of humanity? That's a conundrum that I got to work with, right? And I work with that through helping brothers and sisters learn through themselves, and maybe they will help me understand that as well. So I come out and I speak a lot because I hope that I will learn something from you all. That one of you in this room would share something with me or a story with me that would enlighten me even greater about my redeemable values. And I hope that I get a question with that tonight.
Thanks to our keynote speakers, and I now have the pleasure of introducing our local respondents. And again, I'm going to introduce them together in the order in which we're going to hear from them. Originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a place close to my heart, Kareem Bilal became a Muslim in 1975 and associates with various mosques in Indianapolis, particularly Nur Allah. For more than a decade, he has used his experiences in life and faith to help promote personal and spiritual transformation among incarcerated men at various Indiana prisons. In a program I just learned earlier this evening, he calls Change of Heart, which has its origins in the Quran itself. Our second respondent is Judge David Shaheed. He became judge in Marion County in 2007 and has since presided over both civil and criminal courts, including Criminal Court 14, the Drug Treatment Diversion Court, and Reentry Court. Before becoming a judge, he worked as a lawyer for the Department of Workforce Development and the Democratic Caucus of the Indiana General Assembly, and once helped win a $3.5 million verdict for the mother of a 16-year-old youth who was found shot in the head in the back of a police car. Judge Shaheed is associate professor at the School of Public and Environmental Affairs here in town at IUPUI. He's also currently the board chair for the Center for Interfaith Cooperation, CIC just to our west. And so we look forward to hearing from both of these speakers, and please welcome them to the podium.
Dearly beloved people, I greet you with the greetings of peace. When you hear a believer in Islam says, Assalamu alaikum, they're saying the same thing that Jesus said in his language. He said, peace be upon you. So believing that Muhammad was God's final prophet, instead he couldn't say peace be upon you. That wasn't his language. He said, Assalamu alaikum. When you hear the name Allah, the first two letters A-L, it means the in English, T-H-E. And La means God. So when we say Allah, it's not taking the name that you have for God. It's saying, out of all the gods that we have as a concept, the God. When you hear the word jihad, it doesn't necessarily mean to blow up something or to terrorize something. It means to struggle against opposition. I struggled to be here today. I was tired, full of fatigue. I struggle to get up and go to work every day. I have to come against the forces within me to get to work. So I'm in jihad. The college student is in jihad, trying to get the best mark, struggling. So jihad, when you hear the word jihad coming through the media, just don't think about human annihilation and devastation. Look at the fundamental and basic meaning of the word jihad, which means to struggle. I want to go right into what I want to say because I only have a few minutes. And I want to say that the criminal mind doesn't come out the female's womb. It is an environmentally manufactured mindset for the purpose of corrupt industry. For the purpose of corrupt industry. Can you imagine how many people have employment because of the criminal mind? Without the criminal mind, there will be no prison system. There'll be no need for police force because all minds would be under the right condition, and that is a mindset living under the control of morality. Muhammad the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him, he said, no greater thing did God create than the human intellect. And if the human intellect falls under the wrong controls, it will develop a society too difficult for human beings to operate and live in peace and tranquility with each other. Prophet Muhammad said every human being is born Muslim and his environment changes him into something else. What did he mean by that? The word Muslim means anything that's standing up in its original nature that it was put in by God. So that means the rabbit, the squirrel, the bird, all objects are Muslim. The human being is the only Muslim in creation when it comes into the world that has the freedom to go outside of the mold that it was originally put in. A rabbit can't do anything but be a rabbit his whole life. A squirrel can't do anything but be a squirrel his whole life. But a human being, he can become or she can become anything he or she wants if it gets tired of or it doesn't like the mold that it's put in. Indianapolis is a potter, a cookie cutter. Philadelphia is a potter, a cookie cutter. The abstract life of all humans is like putty and clay. You've heard the expression, she's putty in my hand. You heard the expression, he's putty in my hand. You hear sometimes, I'm not impressed. That's clay talk. But we're different from the kind of clay you can buy at Walmart. We're the kind of clay that can talk back. The Quran calls it sounding molded clay. Clay that once it's impressed, it says something. So like the parakeet who hears what it says, children are being molded and shaped by the social picture that it sees in front of us. And that's why the scriptures say each generation is responsible for the generation that's coming behind it. If you can imagine a bowl of Rice Krispies, they're all bland. They all have the same origin. But you decide whether you're going to put honey on it. You decide whether you're going to put cinnamon on it. You're going to decide whether you want to put sugar, sweet and low or regular, on those Rice Krispies. Whatever goes in the bowl changes up the original designs of the Rice Krispies. So imagine Indianapolis as being the bowl and the Rice Krispies being brand new babies. No baby comes here crying in Chinese. No baby comes here crying in Russian. Every baby comes here with the same universal cry, wah, same universal cry. Every baby comes here with the same abstract life, ready to be shaped by whoever touches that internal life. So people are products of their environment. And I read on a church lawn that evil will grow and take over the environment when good people do nothing. As long as it's on the west side and I'm on the east side, it's okay. Where's that storm at? In Texas. Oh, thank God it's not here in Indianapolis. As long as we see differences instead of sameness. In other words, we are a kind, like rabbit kind, like squirrel kind, like horse kind, or giraffe kind. We are a kind, we are the human kind. But once you sit like the corrupt product makers did above the bowl of the Rice Krispies and you throw guns inside that bowl, you throw joblessness on one side of the bowl, and you show people having jobs on the other side of the bowl, you throw color consciousness in the bowl, you throw racism in the bowl, you throw promiscuous sexual activity in the bowl, you put strip bars in the bowl, you put all those things in the bowl, you will create social hell. And that's why you hear the expression, what in hell is going on here? Not after you die. You see? So we create our own social hell. Now, we've been created by the Creator to live under controls. I don't remember in kindergarten having a class on morality. But when I look back now, if I had a class on morality, when I stepped out on the social arena, for want of a better expression, to compete for my material establishment, I would have had a moral compass of what is harmful and what is not. I wouldn't have operated on impulse. I would have operated like the cat on caution, you see? So I've been programmed to respond impulsively. In other words, if you take a playpen and you put a baby inside that playpen and you put 5 toys in the playpen, all humans are driven by curiosity, the hunger to know. You put 5 toys in that playpen, the baby's going to pick up each toy out of curiosity, and when it gets bored, it's going to throw down a toy. Now, if you put crazy glue on the 5th toy, and the child goes to pick it up and say, hey, I can't put this down. So from 1 to 10 years old, he's walking around with this in his hand. He can't get it. It's uncomfortable, too, because he can't do a lot with this in his hand. This is his writing hand. He can't do a lot with his hand. And as he's walking through his 20s, he still got this. His wife, as he said, what's that in your hand? I picked it up when I was 2 years old. I haven't been able to put it down since. Right? So his whole life, he is affected by this object that he picked up. So what the corrupt product makers have done, like in the Frankenstein movie, they took certain parts to make human beings. In other words, in the Frankenstein in the movie, he did what? He turned on the corrupt scientists that made him. And isn't that what the gangbangers are doing today? Isn't that what the dope dealers are doing today? Isn't that what the serial killers are doing today? The corrupt product makers who shape their internal lives for these corrupt roles, they're now turning on the public. So you say, well, Kareem, that didn't happen to me, but it happened to too many of us, and we're all in the same bowl. If they say if a serial killer is on the east side and I'm on the west, I should be concerned, because that's not a far distance, you see? So I want you to leave here with the mindset to be reminded that the criminal mind is a mindset that's built for business and industry. It is a multi-trillion-dollar industry if it's restored, if it's repaired, if it's reconstructing, if morality can be put in, if the new perception of the environment can be put in, that the environment is not a place to go play lottery, go gamble, go drink, and all these other different things. One girl said to me, I'm not an alcoholic, I'm just a recreational drinker. I said, well, where did you get the phrase recreational from? Like a parakeet, you heard it in the movies. Or you heard it in the media. And now to justify the habit, you say recreational. But you got to spend dollars to be a recreational drinker. And every dollar you spend on the alcohol industry, when you die, you kept it alive, and it's going to turn alcoholics and the baby that's not yet born. So it's a corrupt cycle that if we don't stand up and first of all, dress ourselves in a moral dress, in a moral covering, like a mosquito repellent. Once you put it on your arm, the mosquito can't get in. It can't get to the blood because you put a barrier there to protect your flesh from the mosquito bite. Once you get that moral suit on, immorality through the corrupt advertisers on billboards and in movies and commercials, they can't attack you in your curiosity and get you to make an impulsive decision and bring your whole internal life under the wrong control, to your own destruction, to your own demise, and cause your heart and mind to live in a divorced state inside your body instead of a unified state inside your body for the whole health of the community that you call yourself. God intended politics in the human body. The mind is supposed to govern everything that's under it. We say mind over matter. But if you allow through one of these doors, your two eyes, your nostrils, your mouth, and your two ears, if you allow the wrong influence to come through those doors, it's going to set itself up as a bully and a boss to the mind inside your body. And you'll find yourself living under the wrong controls, a hustler inside your own body for its destruction and for the wrong appetites and the wrong pleasures. I encourage all of you young people that are going to college and are trying to get that higher knowledge, don't forget to take morality with you. You see in the media, a lot of these guys, they have the intelligence to take them to some of the highest seats in the land. But because of a lack of morality, they fall right back down because they make something they didn't correct on the way up. They fall right back down and find themselves in a shameful, public, disgraceful position. I encourage all of you to take the position that those individuals who fill up the prison systems, they were babies first. Every man on death row was a baby first. Every man or woman doing life without the possibility of parole was a baby first. They came here traveling on the same pattern of the rest of creation. Submission, the night chasing the day chasing the night, the clouds, the seasons changing, the leaves falling off the trees and getting them back in the spring. These are all pictures of submission all around our thinking, all around our intellect. We're the only thing that's been given in creation that had the freedom to say, I'm going to go with the flow of submission or I'm going to rebel and do my own thing. We're the only creature. But look at the cost that it costs us. You turn on the news every morning before I go to work. I turn on the news and I see where somebody got shot the night before. Somebody's son was killed the night before, you see? And it's because we have the attitude, we live in a state of fear, some of us. We have the attitude where we're not willing to sacrifice for the generation that's not on the planet yet. We're not willing to sacrifice our creature comforts to bring in a new configuration, for one of a better expression, social configuration, for one of a better expression, for the babies that are not yet born to come in and have their clay shaped where they don't see differences in color. I have no control over the color that I live in. You have 7 Cadillacs, 1 blue, 1 orange, and 1 green. You tell me, Brother Cream, I don't like the brown one that you drive. I say, hey, I didn't paint it, I'll just drive it. All right? That's the attitude we should have. We should see sameness everywhere we go when we see human beings. We're all breathing from the same oxygen system. I don't have mine independent one. Maybe I will one day if I mess up my lungs or something. We're using the same sun. We're drinking from the same water. We are the same kind. It is those who want to conquer and divide the human family and turn them against each other for profit. It is those who have shaped these perceptions where we can't live in the same social bowl and be brothers and sisters to one another, helping each other to prosperity. Thank you so much for the time you've given me for these few words. Peace be upon you.
Peace be unto you. And my thanks to Daniel and Chad for inviting me. And I'm truly honored to be on this panel with Iman in particular. And thanks to all of you for being here. As a judge who's been in the court, in particular the criminal court, it's really encouraging that people, especially students, will come out to hear about a subject like incarceration. It's not a popular subject, but it is a subject that costs all of us as taxpayers lots and lots of money. And so there's lots to be learned from what is going on with the criminal justice system. I first want to thank Iman for the work that they do, in particular with respect to healthcare. Healthcare is a big issue, it's a big concern, and it's a topic that all of us are thinking about in this season where we have elections coming up. My interaction with healthcare as it related to the reentry court, and reentry court is a problem-solving court. Most people are familiar with the typical courts where you see a judge in a black robe, you see 2 parties at tables, typically several feet away from the judge, and the judge is just listening and people are arguing and making their points. Reentry court is a problem-solving court. And before I would have a session with the people that were returning to the community, at the beginning on a weekly basis, we would have a team meeting. And so the case manager that was working with the individual, as well as the administrator of that program, and the public defender and prosecutor would have a meeting, and we would discuss the review of progress with respect to the people that were on the list for that calendar. On one particular session, kind of a case meeting, there was a mention made about an individual. We'll say his name was Robert. I hope that doesn't offend anybody who's out there who might be named Robert. But anyway, the case manager was saying that Robert seemed to be doing okay, but Roger made a comment about his alter ego and how his alter ego was feeling uncomfortable and wanted to do violence to someone. What that caused us to do was look into the fact that he was on meds when he was in the institution. They didn't give him sufficient medication when he left the institution. He was starting to feel uncomfortable, but because we had a problem-solving court that was dealing with those issues, we were able to get him on his medication, and there was no violence that came from that situation. The fact that the man was there with healthcare providers and a place where people can come when they are returning back to their communities is good for all citizens in the city of Chicago, and we just need to have more programs like that. Because when people return from the institution, they have the choice of either going back to the neighborhood that they came from, and we typically know what that is like, or they can return to a healthy place like Human. So we applaud them for the work that they do. We just wish that there were more institutions and situations like that. One of the other things that I want to commend the Indiana legislature on is criminal justice reform. They did that a couple of years ago, and for judges in the criminal courts, some of the penalties have been reduced, and there are more opportunities for community placements. Community placements, instead of sending people away to prison, is good for our community, good for the taxpayers. Those individuals can work on their problems. Many of them are drug problems. We know that there's an opioid crisis, and so they can stay in their communities, they can work, they can be attached to their families, and they have a better road to recovery and coming back to the community as healthy citizens. That is the model that has come about through criminal justice reform in Indiana. And in this legislative season, this year, the federal government adopted criminal justice reform. The key thing to understand and appreciate that as citizens in this audience is that that reduces the amount that it has to be paid out to incarcerate those individuals. The typical cost of incarcerating a person per year, and this is particularly meaningful to the college students that are here, is between $30,000 and $50,000 per year per inmate. And the typical sentence of inmates is 5 years, so you just do the math. That would pay for some college education along the way. So criminal justice reform at the federal and at the state level is a positive step forward. I'll just make one brief comment with respect to the incarceration of Muslims. One of the things that is of concern with respect to criminal justice is the increase with respect to private prisons. We all know, and we should remember from our civics classes, hopefully in high school, that there's a First Amendment to the Constitution. And that First Amendment, that there is basically that there should be no establishment of a sole religion, nor should there be any impediment of the free exercise of religion. Unfortunately, based upon the way things occur in the prison system, there is discrimination with respect to how Muslims are treated. In many situations, there are these prisons are in remote areas. Those remote areas don't have contacts with diverse populations, Typically, they're not familiar with Muslims. And so where Christians have the benefit of God pods in a lot of the institutions, those Christians who want to sign up to be in a special unit, they're allowed to be in a God pod. The Muslims are being discriminated against with respect to trying to practice Ramadan and just the basic practice of the religion, because there is a basic insensitivity, and that is more or less the way the institutions work. The ACLU has cited the fact that because there are more private prisons, the federal government in particular has over 30,000 inmates in private prisons. There is a lack of accountability in these private prisons that is more available with state-run prisons or federal prisons, but with private prisons, that is a significant problem. So if it's a problem with respect to all inmates, it's a particularized problem as far as Muslim inmates. So again, I want to thank all of you for being here for this session, and I look forward to the question and answer session, because this is an important conversation, not only because of the impact that it has on what we spend as a government and as a country, but it is also important with respect to the individuals' lives who can be positively affected if the circumstances or situations that they are in are properly understood. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers for those really stimulating presentations. We're now going to move into our session of Q&A. We have about 40 minutes to discuss the topic of the evening with our speakers. I'll moderate that discussion. We have at least one microphone here, and when the time comes, you can raise your hand and I'll try to direct a microphone towards you. Please speak into that mic, even if it takes a little time to get to you. We're video recording the event, so we want to make certain that your voice gets on the video recording, and of course we also want to make certain that our speakers here at the table can hear you. Keep your questions as brief as possible, be coherent, be concise, so that we can keep the focus on our speakers, and of course your questions will just prompt them to share more of their wisdom. And you can direct your questions at one of our panelists or at all of them collectively if you'd like. So who would like to begin? While other people are speaking, if you're raising your hand, I'll be looking for you, and I'll kind of get a queue going.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question about the Iman healthcare. We Christians have such a fight over women's health services. How do you deal with them?
Well, Iman is located in a community that's a predominantly Christian community, so we serve a predominantly Christian population as well as a Muslim population. People come to the Iman Health Center from over 100 zip codes. We get patients all the way from western suburbs, far western suburbs, 50 miles away, as well as from Indiana, to come to our health center. We provide gender concordant services, health services. Our medical director is a woman. We have 2 physician's assistants. All of our medical clinic staff are women. We have male volunteers. So we provide significant services for women at our health center. We provide a range of services. We provide well women visits, all of that. Did I answer your question? Okay.
On the subject of private prisons, as a citizen, I didn't enroll. I never voted for private prisons. How did they come about? How did they become so prevalent in our justice system?
Several years ago, early in my career, I had an opportunity to work for the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives. And in Indiana, and it was typically pretty much the situation around the country, and that is that legislators were getting tired of building prisons because you had to the bricks and mortar plus the staffing plus the meals. It's just easier to contract with someone to provide those services. Also, it contracts away some of the liabilities that are associated with running an institution like a prison. And so economically, as a commissioner for the Department of Corrections, if I'm looking at the cost of building a prison, staffing it, and providing the services, or just contracting with a private entity to do it, it's just cheaper to do the private entity. That's how they have grown in use around the country. Yes.
I also want to add and I agree with you 110%, it lessens the liability to the state agency, right? Illinois, the Correction Officers Union in Illinois lobbied and won successfully a piece of legislation forbidding privatization of prisons in the state of Illinois. But unfortunately, the cost of our incarceration in our state is almost $1.2 billion annually, only to incarcerate about 40,000 individuals. That's absurd when you look at that. Just do the math.
Being here. Sorry. Thought it was a really interesting discussion. So my question is for Dr. Lewis. You were talking about how you guys believe that social work should be done by those most affected in the community. So I was wondering if you could talk about what you guys are doing at Amman to kind of transition into the more like community-based aspect of leadership.
Well, for Iman, it's not a transition. We've always been led by the most affected, and we, through our organizing, and my colleague Nasir can speak to this as well, we have an organizing department, and our organizing department is led by young people, young adults, young students, community residents. We have a youth board. We have a project in the community. It's a corner store project where we're developing a healthy corner store, and we have a steering committee that includes community residents. And our organizing campaign called it's the Corner Store Campaign for Health, Wellness, and Healing. We work with neighborhood residents and corner store operators, and the community residents lead the Iman, along with community residents, facilitate dialogue with the corner store operators. We provide organizing training, and the organizing training is not only implemented with staff members, but also implemented with leaders. And I'm going to stop there because my colleague here is an organizer, so he can speak more to how we do more with community residents and leading with those most affected.
One of the I don't want to say events. One of the programs that Iman offers is Grassroots Power Hour. We do this every Wednesday evening. And this is an event where we invite the community out to speak upon issues that affect them, right? And this is an opportunity for the community to come to Iman and learn our organizing training. So we invite community members all the time, especially brothers and sisters in our Green Reentry program, particularly those who are returning home from incarceration. We invite them out, and we want them to speak upon the things that's bothering them. And then we help them to develop those issues into organizing campaigns, right? I always stand behind the scenes because I help train individuals how to find their voice, how to speak their voice to action. We teach them what power is, how to do a one-to-one, right? What do you mean by the world as is and the world could be? We introduce all of those concepts to them to help them build their voice and help them build power. And then we teach them what equity is, right? What does it mean when you have equity? And we organize around, we help teach them how to organize around those concepts. And this is what Iman does, and we build leaders like that.
Hi, I wanted to, of course, thank you guys for your insight. I had a question. Really, there are a lot of challenges surrounding community work. Of course, a major one in the way of healthcare is not being able to reach everyone. That at the end of the day, lives will still be lost. How do you handle the sort of like moral implications and emotional labor of your work?
I'll start. Can you explain a little bit more when you say the moral implications of our work?
Yeah, so just knowing that like you can't reach everyone and feeling that like level of guilt, I think that may be present, or maybe the level of guilt that isn't present in that way.
Yeah. Self-care, we're conscious of that. We're conscious of the, the community that we work in, people that we work with, that many people in social work experience. Many people who work in communities like the community we work in, or work in with various populations, even in the court system. And I think that all of us on here in some way can speak to this question as far as how, when we feel that we can't address all of the need that's out there, how does that impact us? As an organization, we try to identify ways in which to cope with that through self-care, through identifying ways to take breaks and to communicate with others as well. We do what we can. We do what we can. I want to have.
I don't know. I got married, so that helps me stay grounded, right? Because I'll keep going and going and going and going and going until I fall out. But no, to answer your question, it's just keeping it real. I love people on the side that's doing natural life and they're never coming home. How can I help that person? Right? I would love that person to come home and to live an enriched life like I am right now. How do you help someone like that? You just got to be realistic with yourself. And self-care is very difficult for someone like me because, again, I just keep going and going and going and going. I don't sleep because I know someone is still doing natural life. I don't sleep because I know there is an individual we call Joe. He's homeless. He literally is living outdoors. But Joe was creative. He created a habitat for himself over this overhang where this apartment or this business used to be, until eventually the city uprooted Joe. So I just keep it real with myself, and I allow my wife to hit me upside the head from time to time if I don't get no sleep, right? Because that's that passion. All of you have that. How do you walk past Joe every day? You see him sleeping out in the streets.
I had a few things that come to my mind listening to the comments that have been made. One of them is that in the 80s, I remember being told about a Christian evangelist by the name of David Wilkerson. Some of you probably have heard of him. And he was in the streets of New York trying to reach the gangs, and he would invite them to Christ and his understanding of God as he knew him. And he saw them responding, but he saw that the minute that he let them go again to their lives, they will go back to the previous habits that they had. So he became concerned, how can I help these young men become consistent on the path of correction? So he had a vision, and he got together with some other very wealthy businessmen and Christians, and they came up with a program called Teen Challenge. And what they did, they found land away from city life where the forces of corruption couldn't reach the man who was trying to recover. And they called it God's Mountain, where men's lives are changed. And they had a situation where I think they had like 2 satellites, one in Missouri and I think one in Kansas, and they had a main one in Rarrisburg, Pennsylvania. And every month, it was like a revolving door. They had graduates and men coming out of the city to come to what was called God's Mountain. Now, it's hard to change a habit living daily in the same situation or surrounded by the same situation. Because if you have to carpool with someone who smoked reefer with you every day on your way to work, and now one day you decide, I'm not going to smoke marijuana, and you get in that car, he fires up one, that's a big challenge for somebody trying to break an addiction. But when you take that mind and heart and those emotions out of the whole arena and put it in a situation where all he's seeing is mountain, sky, praising God, reaching for change, different programs where they would send some people out to knock on doors, and some people were a part of a choir, you know, where they went around the United States and invited people to God and talked about their salvation and their change and everything. I believe that once you bring a person out of the sickness that they chose themselves into and put that same soul in a clean, healthy environment that invites pictorially change, and then you tell that person, now that you're cleaned up from the habit actively, you can go back if you do not activate in you moral life. Moral life. Moral life is going to be your protection when you go back into go back into society again. If your morals are still low, if you still have an affection for the drugs and the alcohol and loose life, you're going to repeat again. So I think that moral piece is like the Iron Man suit. If any of you seen the movie, once he got inside that suit, nothing could touch him. I think it's like the Superman suit. Once he got inside that suit, he left the earth and broke gravity and created his own plane. And humans can do that. I'm not saying you can jump out the window and start flying. Don't go back and say, oh, Brother Kareem said we can fly now. No, I didn't say that. But what I'm saying is, in your conscious mind, you can ascend to a place where evil can't reach you. And they can't work on your curiosity to cause you to become a slave to your own destruction. But the important thing is that when a man, incarceration is a beautiful thing if it's looked at correctly. Because if I was on fire with the wrong habits and wrong desires, and incarceration put those fires out, and I got the weight back on my body, I got my mind back again, I'm putting some vocational skill or something like that, that I was really saved in a bad situation. But recidivism, going back and forth, recidivism is a business too. It's a multi-billion-dollar business too. How many people can we violate in a year's time? Nobody is building prisons today. Newcastle prison is like a college. It's so beautiful in its construction. The floors look like you can eat off of it. Computers everywhere, educational system, teachers from different colleges. Nobody is building buildings like that and investing billions of dollars without a concern for human bodies being in those beds. And in order to get human bodies in those beds, you have to seduce them out of their right minds and bring them under corrupt controls. And in time, because God created an adjustment law for when we go too far to the right, to the wrong, something happens where we're corrected and we're taken out of the situation we were in and we're put in a place of recovery. So the big focus should be, why are we building prisons to incarcerate new people instead of addressing the problem? And the problem is, how are we constructing human life from infancy to adult life? If we can grab a hold of that knowledge and look at the new generation that are clean and pure. I got 2 stepsons right now. They haven't touched any drugs. They haven't smoked any cigarettes. I tell them all the time, you are in your innocence and you are in your purity, but the environment's going to try to seduce you into a cigarette habit, an alcohol habit, et cetera, et cetera. As long as you hold on to your innocence and purity, you can have anything you want in this life. You can create heaven on earth for you materially, financially, and your wife and your husband and your children, et cetera, et cetera. But that moral piece, if that's not activated in the human being, he's like walking around like Adam in a garden with no clothes on. That moral piece is the garment. And in the Quran, God says, "Oh, you who believe." That's not just talking to the Muslim. It says, "Oh, you who believe." That's anybody that believes in God. Do not let Satan seduce you out of your original dress like he did your parents in the garden. And what is that original dress? Innocence and purity. How did it come off? Knocked on the door of my curiosity and got me to touch something without knowledge. Appetites unchecked by knowledge. So I believe with all my heart, once we go back to the fundamentals and say what created the criminal mindset, and go back to baby life and see they didn't come here criminals. They couldn't even talk when they got here. They were innocent, clean, and pure. And start creating an environment to bring that child to reach the destiny that God created it for, and that is to be a master over his environment and a master over the drives and appetites in his flesh.
With respect to how I have worked with the difficulties of success and failure, in particular with respect to problem-solving courts, drug treatment, and reentry, you have to approach, and part of my work in interfaith has been a big help. One interaction caused me to look at the work of Jesus as the work of being the present with that person as the best example of a God-conscious person she could be in that interaction. A lot of times when you see examples of judges in courts, you don't really see any sensitivity to the person that is in front of them. But that's one of the things I learned through interfaith. And so with both drug treatment and reentry, we had graduations. They would have to be in drug treatment, typically about a year. The same for reentry, that if they successfully completed the program for a year, then they would graduate. We'd have a ceremony just like any other graduation. But there's also a concept, especially with respect to recovery, called harm reduction. So every day that a person is avoiding relapse, every day that a person is avoiding self-destructive behavior is a success. And I can remember one woman that she didn't make it, and eventually we had to send her to prison. But I don't know how, it'd been months, maybe a year or two later, I got this wonderful letter, must have been about 20 pages, where she had had the time to reflect over the things that she learned when she was in the diversion program. And those lessons that were passed along, not just by me, but by her case manager and by the prosecutor and the public defender that were working with her, those were lessons that she'd been able to process, and it had taken her to a better place. So not everything is an immediate success with a graduation, but we do the work because we know that every day that keeps a person away from self-destructive behaviors is a good, positive outcome.
We're going to go here and then up in the back and then over here, and I just saw another hand, so we'll come back around then.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. As Judge Shahid mentioned, Iman is great. We need more programs like it. I don't think we have something like that in Indy. I was wondering if maybe there are some thoughts about creating any kind of, nationwide healthcare system for Muslims specifically. Any ideas behind this, whether it be possible, whether it be even effective or good. For Muslims, especially those Muslims who are working in the masjids, in the Islamic schools, and then other formerly incarcerated people who are seeking reentry in the community. Is there any kind of ideas or thinking about something like that?
All I can say is Iman is a model, but I don't know if we have the sophistication or the leadership to have that in Indianapolis right now.
Iman's Health Center serves all populations, not just Muslims, and actually anybody and everyone. As far as I don't know of any particular effort towards providing health services specifically to Muslims only. I'm not sure if that exists, but as far as Iman, we provide health care for everyone, primary behavioral dental services for everyone in Chicago. We provide some behavioral health care in Atlanta. We have offices not only in Chicago but also in Atlanta, and we'll be expanding that, God willing, in the extended future. But I can't speak to anything else that's specifically for Muslims.
First of all, I want to applaud each and every one of y'all for your effort that y'all are putting forth. It's greatly needed. I was listening to the one brother talk about creatures, you know what I'm saying, and how we are creatures of habit. Some of us are animalistic, and maybe we can rise up to that intellectual aspect, but it only comes through guidance. You know what I'm saying? And what I've come to understand is that I need guidance from the cradle to the grave, not just 1 through 12 or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Guidance is something that's nurturing. I need a lot of, you know what I'm saying? And it continues to grow. I need that positive affirmation, that positive guidance, you know what I'm saying? And I don't know if there's much about medical situations as far as Muslims or whatever go on. But I know Masjid Mu'mineen, it has a Monday night Sirat al-Mustaqim, where it does a lot of networking with people who've been incarcerated and coming back and trying to get their life on track. So it offers a lot of tools and a lot of information to help individuals try to get back on course. Thank you.
Actually might be a really useful time just to recognize that Brother Ismail is here from Al Mu'mineen Mosque. Maybe raise your hand. Yeah, there we go. So that is one mosque in the area that's doing work with ex-offender returning citizens. So if you're looking for a local connection, there's one. So I'm sorry, we've got a bit of a long queue now. So it was up there in the back, the gentleman with the hat. Sorry, I can't see very well. Then over here in the green shirt. And then we'll come back down here.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is for David Shaheem and Brother Kareem. You talked about prison reform. So in 2005, there was 50,000 people in America on electronic monitors. In 2015, it was 125,000. So what you actually see is cities and states transferring the burden of the taxpayers paying the incarceration rate onto the most oppressed group. When you look at President Trump's reform plan, he pretty much does the same thing. Can we really call it reform if we're just transferring that burden?
That's an excellent question, but I can say from my experience, most individuals who are incarcerated, if they have a choice of being behind prison walls or having an ankle bracelet, they would take the ankle bracelet. It is a shifting of cost, but it also is part of accepting responsibility for one's life. In the institution, you're told when to get up, when the lights are turned out, when to go to meals, when to go to, what you're told from 24 hours a day when you can do everything. Part of reform, not only from the standpoint of government, is also with respect to the individual. It is many times an oppressive burden. I would not argue with you there. When you look at the fees that people who are coming out of prison have to deal with, be on probation or parole, they've got court costs that they have to pay. Some of them have sometimes have child support. It is a lot. But with organizations like Iman, you have people that you can talk with, case managers, people that can can help you figure out those problems. But bottom line, most individuals that I've talked to over my career, if they have a choice of being in prison where you're told what to do all the time, or being on an ankle bracelet where you have to pay for it, they would take the ankle bracelet. That's just my experience.
The ankle bracelet, if responded to, in my mind, correctly, is also a measure of security for undealt with appetites that are still alive inside of the person reentering, that they may not have dealt with while they were incarcerated, and they may still be fantasizing about having an ankle monitor on. Is like putting a check system on them where they, when the appetite rises up on them, they have something they have to contend with. Okay, now if I get caught, I go back. If that ankle monitor wasn't there, maybe they might think, oh, I can go get it and come back before anybody knows. So, and I tell people a lot of times who are re-entering, a lot of the restrictions that are put on you, I believe firmly this, that nothing can happen except it be the will of God. Nothing can occur except it be the will of God. And if God is interested in saving you from fiery, corrupt passions, he may put a lot of restrictions on a person re-entering. You know, and it's not to cause him not to have the freedom to run and do what he wants to do like an unbridled horse, but it's to let him gradually come back into society and re-enter and blend in again and be okay with being responsible and doing for yourself, et cetera, because like the judge said, you know, for maybe 15 years, somebody cooked his food, somebody paid his electric bill, somebody did everything for him. It's like that Gary Gilmore case who wanted to be executed. In the movie, the DA was asked, how does a man do 12 years, come out and go back to the same thing? He said everything was done for him for 12 years. You put him out in a brand new society, in a brand new system. Many people don't know how to get on a bus anymore. I recall going to pick a gentleman up from Newcastle, and they let him out in the clothes that he wore inside the prison to come out with. So immediately I took him to Walmart, redressing, and I looked up. He was just fascinated at seeing people pushing carts with cell phones. He had been away so long. I looked up again. He was looking at the TV sets in amazement, and I thought to myself, wow, this really psychologically can mess a person up. By nightfall, we were standing on the corner. He didn't know when to cross the street on lights. You see? So this readjustment period is important, but if you burden a person with too much difficulty and not a good support system, and this monitor being on the ankle, yeah, I agree with the judge also, and you as well, that the burden is shifted as far as cost is concerned. But at the same time, I see it as a preventative measure to help the person stay in place rather than as soon as they get out, run and say, oh, I've been away all this time, it's time to party, you know. So I think with all my heart, with all my mind, that if a person's heart is in the right place, the creator of heaven and earth is going to create the circumstances where that person succeeds in his reentry.
I just thought of one other thing. One of the things that is sometimes overlooked is that when individuals go away, when they come back, there's streetwise people that are waiting for them to come back because they're marks, because they've been out of the system. And the first thing somebody who's streetwise does is they offer them vices. And so I don't need to detail what the typical vices might be for a man that's been in prison 15 to 20 years. But having the ankle bracelet is a protection for them because, like Kareem says, they have to think about where they're going because they're being monitored. So it really serves as a protection for them, even though they may not be aware of it at the time.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm in a campaign right now to end electronic monitoring, believe it or not, because of the industry that it created. As a matter of fact, right before I was released, the individual that was setting the conditions of my mandatory supervised release insisted on me doing 90 days electronic monitoring. And I asked him why. He said, well, it's because of your case. I was convicted of a violent case. And I said, well, that was over 24 years ago. I'm not that man anymore. And can you show me reasons why I need to have electronic monitoring supervision? He couldn't give me no other reasons and no other rationales. So I ended up doing 60 days instead of 90 days because I argued the case effectively. But the point that you brought out, right? How did it grow? How did that industry grow? What'd you say, from 50,000 to 150,000? It's much greater than that. Right. What's going on with electronic monitoring right now from my studies? The industry is growing. We do need checks and balances. We actually do need checks and balances. But at what cost? And is it effective? From what I've learned with the use of electronic monitoring now, a lot of people don't know this, is that today's monitor can hear everything. It can actually call you and talk to you. Why are you not in the area where you're supposed to be? It has GPS tracking devices now. It tracks everywhere you go, right? And because of the cost to the state, they're instilling that cost on those who has to wear those devices now. But is it a cost-effective device? A lot of people is willing, and it's being used at a rate now for probationers, and it's being used at a rate instead of bail. You can come home. No one wants to sit in a box, a 6-foot by 9-foot or 12-foot by 12-foot box, when they can come home and move around. But what is not being told to the general public is how effective the ankle monitoring is. I'm not going to go on a tangent. I just want to state that it's not really effective as what is being put out there. I'm going to ask all of you to educate yourself, right? There are good opportunities for those coming home wearing an ankle bracelet. But based on my research and studies, it's not as effective as the public, as the industry is trying to paint. I'm just going to tell you to educate yourselves on that and get up with me, and I will share with you the data that's out there, because I can sit in here for the next 3 hours and blow your mind about what's going on. But I'm in a campaign in all actuality to eliminate electronic monitoring, because the public is being duped about the effectiveness of it.
We have about 5 minutes left, and we have, I think, time for one final question. Apologies that we're going to have to end it with that one.
Assalamu alaikum. I suspect there's a lot of folks that came to this program who in the future may be in organizations like yours and helping people. So could you respond? I'm going to take you back to the concept of jihad being a struggle. Could some of the panel members talk about the relationship between the jihad of self-care?
I'm in jihad right now. I have diabetes, and I can tell if I'm working too hard or it's too stressful, because it keeps my glucose levels elevated really, 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 really high, right? And I'm insulin dependent. The jihad of self-care is real. It's real. And if we're not aware that we're not taking care of ourselves, you will find out, whether you realize it or not, your body will begin to fail. You'll start having physiological problems. You'll start developing physiological problems. Stress is what? The #1 silent killer in our nation, really globally. It's because we're running around working, worrying about everybody's problems, but ourselves. And the Quran speaks on that. It teaches us that. You cannot change the condition of a people until you change the condition within yourselves. How many people overlook thinking that I got to help someone get home or find a job or overcome their difficulties when you haven't even looked at your own difficulties? So the Quran even teaches self-care. It tells you, worry about yourself first. How can you help someone else when you're not even helping yourself first? Right? So that jihad should be against yourself. And I need to focus on that. So I need to make a jihad against myself because I'm not taking very good care of myself. And again, that's why I say I got married, because I have a bad habit of not looking at myself. But now I have a partner that reminds me every time I forget that. So we definitely need that jihad.
And just to reiterate, remember that the word jihad means to struggle against opposition. That's all it means. It doesn't mean to tie a bomb around yourself and walk in Walmart and holler, Allahu Akbar, and push the button. It doesn't mean that at all. It simply means to struggle against opposition. And we all struggle every day against opposing forces within us and within our environment.
Oh, I'm fine. I was going to respond to it. Yes, the jihad is real. It's real not only for organizations, my colleagues and I. I mean, it's constant because you're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in many capacities, trying to especially depending on what you're doing, whether it's So, for example, even I think about my colleagues who do outreach. We have outreach workers who work in some of the most blocks that have the highest rates of shootings. And so our guys are out there in the evening and they're trying to keep people off the street. And so all of us, whether it's a calling to do the work that we do at Iman, or it's a calling to ministry, it's a calling to do other types of social work, the jihad is challenging. It is a struggle against ourselves. It's a struggle against trying to do better for not only for self-care but also for our families. Your children are asking you, when are you coming home? Why are you staying here? Why do you have to go there? It's constant. Or you end up in a divorce, or you make sure that your wife is keeping you, focused. So yeah, it's a constant struggle whenever you're doing any type of work where you feel like you have a calling and where you feel like you're doing, especially when you feel like it's a calling and that you're reflecting God's light in it.
I want to say one more thing. And we have to recall also that even coming into this world, we struggled to come out of the womb. The mother is told, push. And she's, oh, and the baby comes out and smack the baby on the bottom and he gets his first breath of life, wah, and then the baby is struggling to crawl and stand up, like he's struggling to come from fours. He came in on an animal plane. Animals are on fours. This is a message from God, that humans are the abstract life that's grown inside a flesh body. But we come here on the animal plane. We do everything animals do: eat, procreate, sleep, recreation. True humans are constructed and built inside of the human being. And you can either deform that person or you can build a true human inside that person, depending upon what ingredients you put inside the person. So, I just encourage everybody just to remember that it's so important to look at where we are in this world. Know that evil, just like if I had cancer in this pinky, I can't look at it and say, oh, it's just a pinky. I got 9 more fingers. If I get cancer, I got another arm. I got to recognize that it's going to progress and growth and take over my whole human self. So when we look at evil, drug dealing, and all those things, we should have the mindset, if we don't stand up and make sacrifices to jihad and oppose this evil, it's going, like the cancer, it's going to take over the whole community life, and we're all going to be in a higher degree of social hell.
All right, let's give our speakers a final round of applause. And on behalf of the Center of Faith and Vocation at Butler, I'd like to once again thank all of our sponsoring partners, the Heirs Fund, the Muslim Studies Endowment, the Desmond Tutu Peace Lab, and the Department of Philosophy, Religion, and Classics at Butler. To learn more about the Center for Faith and Vocation or sign up for the Center's external newsletter where you'll hear about these kinds of events, please visit the Center's table in the lobby. And at the Center's table, you'll also find a detailed brochure about the rest of the seminars in this series, as well as information about our new View film series events, which are also free and open to the public. The next film in that series will be part of the Spirit in Place Festival. It's titled Backs Against the Wall, the Howard Thurman Story, and it will be screened on November 6th, next week, at 7 p.m. over at Ides and Duckwall Theater. Our next seminar in this Religion and Incarceration series is not until January 28th. It's titled Dharma in Hell, Buddhist Mindfulness in Prisons, and we'll be joined by nationally recognized and formerly incarcerated author, activist, and mindfulness instructor Fleet Mall. And now, as myself, no longer speaking on behalf of the Center for Faith and Vocation, I'd like to thank Daniel Myers, Director of the Center for Faith and Vocation, and the Center's Assistant Director, Marguerite Stanchu, who's really responsible for bringing all of this together. And they both have been wonderful partners for me this year, and they're both absolutely instrumental every year in the production of this series overall, from conception to execution. So thanks to all of our speakers and to all of you for coming this evening.